It was a cold and rainy night in Budapest. The city glowed under a blanket of fog, with its old streets and historic buildings wrapped in an unsettling silence. Ilka, a young woman with dark hair and watchful eyes, was at home, enjoying the rare moment of calm. The walls of her small apartment in the Obuda district seemed to offer a safe haven from the world outside. Suddenly, a muffled sound interrupted her peace. It was a faint, almost inaudible cry coming from the front door. With her heart racing, Ilka got up and slowly walked to the door. When she opened it, she found an old wicker basket, soaked by the rain. Inside it, a baby wrapped in worn blankets was crying softly. Ilka looked around, searching for any sign of who might have left the child there, but saw no one. Only the empty street and the steady rain. Unsure of what to do, she picked up the basket and brought it inside, closing the door behind her. The baby, with pale skin and sparse hair, had large eyes that seemed to watch Ilka with an inexplicable wisdom for someone so young. As she rocked the baby in her arms, trying to soothe it, she noticed something strange, a small amulet hanging around its neck. The amulet was made of dark, cold metal with intricate symbols that Ilka couldn't decipher. A chill ran down her spine. Something was definitely wrong. But, despite her reservations, she decided to care for the baby that night, promising herself she would find a solution in the morning. As the night went on, Ilka felt a strange presence in her home. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the air was thick with a heavy, oppressive energy. She didn't know that by bringing the baby inside, she had opened the door to forces beyond her understanding. The clock on the wall ticked away slowly, each tick sounding like a war drum in her ears. And so, the night dragged on, filled with mysteries and omens, marking the beginning of a series of terrifying events that would change Ilka's life forever. Dawn brought a pale, cold light to Budapest, with the sun struggling to break through the dense fog that covered the city. Ilka, after an almost unfathomable night of vigil and fear, woke to the soft sound of the baby. Feeling exhausted but determined, she began to investigate the child she had found the night before. The baby seemed calmer now, its large, curious eyes following every movement of Ilka. As she changed its clothes, Ilka noticed strange marks on the baby's skin. These weren't ordinary birthmarks but intricate designs, almost like tattoos, forming complex patterns. She tried to clean them, thinking they might be dirt or paint, but the marks remained. Intrigued and a bit frightened, Ilka decided to seek help. She took the amulet she had found around the baby's neck the night before and put it in her bag. With the baby securely wrapped in a blanket, she left the house and walked through the still sleeping streets of the city towards the local library. There, she knew an old friend, Peter, a historian specializing in Hungarian legends and myths. Upon arrival, Ilka was greeted with a warm but concerned smile from Peter. She told him everything about the previous night and showed him the marks and the amulet. Peter, upon seeing the symbols, became visibly disturbed. He recognized the designs as ancient Hungarian symbols often associated with mystical rituals and occult practices. These marks, Peter said, his voice trembling, are known as scent gel, the sacred signs. For centuries, they were used by cults to mark those destined to be sacrificed or offered in rituals. And this amulet, it's a protection talisman, but not for the bearer, rather for those around them. It's meant to contain something very dangerous. Ilka felt a deep chill run through her body. The baby seemed to be an enigma shrouded in darkness, tied to a dark and dangerous history. Peter suggested they investigate further, looking for ancient texts and manuscripts that might reveal more about the symbols and the amulet. As Peter delved into the dusty books of the library, Ilka felt an increasing sense of dread. It was as if every page turned revealed a piece of a macabre puzzle. They were dealing with ancient forces that should not be disturbed. As the hours passed, Peter found a reference to a nearly forgotten legend. The story spoke of a baby marked by the scent gel, destined to be the vessel of an ancient and vengeful spirit. This spirit, known as the Shadow of Budapest, was said to bring doom and destruction to all who crossed its path. Ilka realized she was involved in something far larger and more terrifying than she could have imagined. The marks on the baby and the amulet were not just symbols, they were signs of a cruel and inescapable fate. And so, with a heavy heart and growing determination, she knew she needed to protect the baby and uncover the truth behind this dark tale before it was too late. Twilight fell over Budapest, bringing with it an unsettling feeling that something was lurking in the shadows. Ilka, back in her apartment with the baby, felt an increasing anxiety she couldn't explain. The day had been exhausting, but her discoveries had only intensified her fear and curiosity. As the baby slept, Ilka tried to relax, but the atmosphere in the apartment seemed heavier and more oppressive. The shadows on the walls looked darker, and the silence, deeper. She decided to make a cup of tea, hoping the warmth would calm her. But just as she started to drink, she heard a sound that made her freeze. Whispers. Faint and almost inaudible, they seemed to come from all corners of the house. Ilka stopped, holding her breath, trying to catch the words. But the whispers weren't in any language she recognized. They were incomprehensible murmurs, carrying a sinister melody that made her skin crawl. She set the cup down and walked slowly to the makeshift crib where the baby slept. The whispers seemed to grow louder as she approached. The baby was still, but something was different in the room. Ilka felt a chilling cold that hadn't been there before. It was as if an invisible presence was watching her every move. Desperate to end the torment, Ilka began reciting an old prayer her grandmother had taught her. As the words left her mouth, the whispers grew quieter but didn't disappear entirely. The baby opened its eyes, staring at Ilka as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Determined not to let fear take over, Ilka picked up the baby and walked through the house, inspecting every corner and shadow. The whispers continued, now softer but still present. In a moment of courage, she shouted, "Who's there? What do you want?" The silence was immediate but lasted only a moment. Then, a clear, distinct voice echoed through the room, "Protect the child. She is the key." Ilka dropped to her knees, holding the baby tightly. Whoever it was knew more than she did, and that knowledge was terrifying. The voice disappeared, and the whispers ceased, leaving only the sound of her heavy breathing and the baby's soft crying. The night wore on, and Ilka stayed awake, holding the baby and pondering the cryptic message. She is the key. The key to what? And why did she need to protect her? With every passing minute, new questions arose and few answers came. Surrounded by mystery and fear, Ilka knew that the real struggle was just beginning. Something dark was stirring, and she was at the center of a storm that threatened to engulf everything she loved. The following day dawned with a gray, weak light, as if the sky itself was reluctant to bring a new day to Budapest. Ilka, exhausted from the night filled with whispers and terror, left the house determined to find answers. With the baby nestled in her arms, she decided to visit the local church, hoping to find some spiritual guidance or, at least, comfort. St. Matthias Church, with its Gothic architecture and colorful stained glass windows, had always been a refuge for Ilka. However, upon entering, she felt that something was wrong. The air was heavy, and there was a palpable sense of unease among the worshippers. Ilka sought out Father Gabor, a wise and kind man known for his knowledge of Hungarian folklore. "Father Gabor, I need your help," Ilka began, her voice trembling. She told him about the baby, the marks, the amulet, and the whispers from the previous night. Father Gabor listened attentively, his face growing paler with each word. When Ilka finished, he took a deep breath and said, "My child, you are dealing with very ancient and dangerous forces. These marks and whispers are signs that evil is near." He told Ilka about an old Budapest legend, the legend of the shadows of Buda. According to the legend, malevolent spirits known as Arnyak haunted the city, especially around Buda Castle. These spirits were attracted by dark rituals and sacrifices, seeking bodies to possess and spread misery. The baby, with its marks, was a magnet for these spirits. Ilka left the church with an even heavier weight on her heart. As she walked through Budapest's narrow, historic streets, she felt watched. The shadows seemed deeper, more alive. It was as if invisible eyes followed her every step. She quickened her pace, trying to shake off the feeling of paranoia. Suddenly, she heard a strange sound, like a whisper but more intense and desperate. Looking around, she saw a dark figure moving swiftly between the alleys. Her legs felt heavy, but she knew she couldn't stop. With the baby pressed against her chest, Ilka ran, trying to find a safe place. The shadows seemed to stretch and reach out, trying to catch her. Every dark corner of the Buda streets seemed to harbor a malevolent presence, ready to pounce on her. Ilka reached Buda Castle, a place full of history and mystery. She searched for a hiding spot, finding refuge in an old, abandoned chapel within the castle grounds. There, amidst the silence and the weight of centuries past, Ilka felt momentarily safe. But the safety was only an illusion. The shadows continued to move outside, waiting, watching. She knew the chapel couldn't protect her for long. As she hid, Ilka remembered Father Gabor's words, "These spirits seek bodies to possess." The baby was the key, but to what? And what should Ilka do to protect it? Fear and uncertainty consumed her, but one thing was clear, she was not alone in this fight. Something dark and ancient was stirring, and Ilka would need all her courage and determination to confront the shadows of Buda. Huddled in the abandoned chapel of Buda Castle, Ilka knew she needed to understand more about the forces pursuing her. She remembered a story her grandmother used to tell when she was a child, a story that now seemed terrifyingly relevant. It was the legend of the White Lady, a spectral figure who roamed the streets of Budapest searching for her lost child. Ilka decided she needed to learn more about this legend. The next morning, she went to the Budapest History Museum, located within the castle's imposing walls. There, she found Julia, a curator and longtime friend. Julia was well versed in the city's stories and legends and was intrigued by what Ilka had been through. "Ah, the White Lady," Julia said, her eyes darkening at the mention of the name. "She is one of the most feared figures in our legends. It is said that she was a noblewoman from the 17th century whose baby was abducted by dark forces. Since then, her spirit has never found peace, wandering the streets on foggy nights, searching for her lost child. It is believed that anyone who crosses her path is destined for misfortune." Julia took Ilka to a section of the museum dedicated to Budapest's urban legends. There, among ancient artifacts and manuscripts, they found an old portrait of the White Lady. The figure in the painting was ethereal in beauty, but her eyes were filled with sadness and despair. Next to the portrait was a text detailing sightings and the tragic events associated with her. "Some say that the White Lady is not just a victim but also a guardian," Julia explained. "She tries to protect other children from a fate similar to her own child's, but those who cross her path often find disaster before the truth is revealed." As Ilka looked at the portrait, she felt a shiver run down her spine. She wondered if the White Lady was somehow connected to the baby she had found. Was the baby the key to freeing the tormented spirit? Or perhaps the child was marked by even darker forces, drawing the White Lady's attention in a desperate attempt to protect her. Back at the chapel, Ilka pondered everything she had discovered. She knew she needed to find a balance between protecting the baby and understanding the true nature of the danger they faced. As night fell, she again felt the presence of shadows, but this time, there was something more. An ethereal figure, bathed in a pale glow, appeared in the distance. It was the White Lady. Ilka watched, frozen with fear and fascination, as the figure slowly approached. The White Lady's eyes were like wells of infinite sorrow, but there was also a spark of determination. As she drew nearer, Ilka heard a soft whisper, like the wind through the trees. "Protect the child. She is the key." With these words, the White Lady vanished, leaving Ilka alone with the baby and the weight of the revelation. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the complete picture was still terrifyingly uncertain. However, one thing was clear to Ilka: the baby was at the center of an ancient struggle between good and evil, and the White Lady was both an ally and a warning. Ilka knew she had to continue, uncover more secrets, and face the dangers to come. The shadows of Budapest would not rest, and neither could she. As night deepened into a blanket of darkness, Ilka decided that the chapel in Buda Castle was no longer a safe place. The presence of the White Lady and the whispers of the shadows had kept her on edge. Determined to protect the baby, she knew she needed to find a new refuge and more answers. So, she ventured through the vast and silent corridors of the castle. The walls of Buda Castle were imposing, steeped in centuries of history and mystery. As Ilka moved forward, the corridors echoed with the footsteps of invisible figures, shadows seeming to lurk in the depths of the past. The baby in her arms was restless, as if sensing the tension in the air. Ilka had heard of a hidden section of the castle, a place where few ventured. It was said that a spectral guardian resided there, a spirit that protected forbidden secrets and hidden knowledge. Convinced she needed all the help she could get, she decided to search for this forgotten section. After wandering through narrow corridors and descending time-worn stairs, Ilka found a heavy, ancient door partially obscured by faded tapestries. With effort, she managed to push it open, revealing a chamber lit only by flickering candles. In the center stood a large stone pedestal covered with manuscripts and ancient objects. Suddenly, a spectral figure emerged from the shadows, a man in medieval guardian attire. His face was serious, but there was a glimmer of recognition in his eyes when he saw the baby. Ilka took a step back, but the specter raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Don't be afraid," the figure said in an echoing voice. "I am Miklos, the guardian of this castle. You are here because you seek answers, and I am the keeper of many secrets." Ilka explained her situation, the discovery of the baby, the marks, the amulet, and the strange events that had followed her. Miklos listened attentively, his expression growing graver with each detail. When she finished, he spoke again. "What you have found is not just a child. This baby is a vessel for an ancient force, a force that malevolent spirits wish to control. The marks on its skin are protection runes, but also runes of sacrifice. The amulet you found is a seal that keeps these forces at bay, but its effectiveness is waning." Miklos approached the pedestal and picked up an ancient scroll. "Here, in this manuscript, is the story of a ritual that can protect the child and seal the evil forces forever. However, to perform it, you need 3 sacred artifacts scattered throughout Budapest: the Cross of Saint Stephen, the Hunyadi Chalice, and the Sword of Arpad. These objects were hidden to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands." Ilka felt a surge of hope mixed with desperation. The task was monumental, but at least now she had a path to follow. Miklos continued, "But be careful. The shadows you have seen will not give up easily. They know you are the key to protecting the baby and will do everything to stop you. Before Ilka could respond, Miklós's specter began to fade, leaving only his voice in the air. Remember, courage and determination are your greatest weapons. Protect the child. She is the key. Alone again, Ilka looked at the baby, who now seemed calmer. Determined to follow Miklós's instructions, she knew her journey was just beginning. With the weight of destiny on her shoulders and courage in her heart, she left the hidden chamber, ready to face the challenges that Budapest still held. The shadows might always be present, but Ilka now had a clear purpose and the hope that by finding the sacred artifacts, she could protect the baby and perhaps, finally bring peace to the White Lady and the restless spirits of Budapest. With a new mission in mind, Ilka left Buda Castle, determined to find the 3 sacred artifacts that could protect the baby and seal away the evil forces. Her first destination was St. Stephen's Church, where she hoped to find the cross of St. Stephen, one of the items mentioned by Miklós. The journey to the church was long and winding, and darkness was beginning to fall over the city. Upon entering the church, Ilka was greeted by the reverent silence and the soft light from the stained glass windows. Father Gabor was there, deep in prayer. When Ilka approached, he looked up, surprised to see her again so soon. She explained her mission, and although worried, Gabor agreed to help her. "There's a crypt beneath the church," he said. "The cross of St. Stephen is down there, but the crypt is protected by ancient enchantments. You must be very careful." Heavy-hearted, Ilka followed the priest to a hidden door behind the altar. They descended a narrow, damp staircase that seemed never-ending. The crypt was a cold, silent place, with moss-covered stone walls and ancient symbols. In the center, on a pedestal, rested the cross, surrounded by a soft aura of light. As Ilka reached for the cross, she felt a malevolent presence. Looking around, she saw the symbols on the walls starting to glow with a sinister light. Suddenly, shadows began to form, taking the shape of skeletal figures with fiery eyes. They were the guardians of the crypt, awakened to protect the artifact from anyone who dared to touch it. Ilka felt a deep fear, but she knew she couldn't back down. With the baby securely in one arm, she reached for the cross. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, the shadows attacked. She dodged and ran toward the exit, clutching the cross tightly. Father Gabor tried to protect her, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water on the shadows, but the spirits were persistent. Escaping the crypt, Ilka and Gabor raced up the stairs, closing the door behind them. The cries of the shadows echoed for a moment, but soon silence returned to the church. Gabor, panting, looked at Ilka with a mix of relief and concern. "You did it," he said. "But the other artifacts won't be any easier to find. And the forces of evil will be even more determined to stop you." Ilka thanked the priest and left the church, feeling the weight of the cross in her bag. She knew her journey was only beginning and that the challenges ahead would be even more dangerous. With the cross in her possession, she now needed to find the Hunyadi chalice and the sword of Arpad. Following the clues left by Miklós, Ilka headed to the Hungarian National Museum, where she believed the chalice was kept. Upon arrival, she noticed an unusually tense atmosphere in the museum. Visitors spoke in hushed tones, and the staff seemed nervous. Ilka approached the head curator, a woman named Catalin, and explained her quest. Catalin, though skeptical, agreed to show Ilka the collection of medieval artifacts. "The Hunyadi chalice is in a special exhibition room," she said. "But there are rumors that the room is haunted. Many avoid going there at night." Ilka felt a chill at this, but knew she had no choice. She followed Catalin to the exhibition room, where the chalice was displayed on a glass pedestal. The room was dimly lit, with only a few weak lights illuminating the historical objects. The chalice was a simple object but emanated a sense of power and history. As Ilka approached, a familiar symbol caught her eye. Etched on the base of the chalice was the same symbol she had seen on the baby's amulet, a circle with a star in the center, surrounded by ancient runes. As she touched it, she felt a surge of energy run through her body. Suddenly, the room's lights began to flicker, and shadows danced on the walls. Catalin screamed, and Ilka turned in time to see dark figures forming again. They were similar to those that had attacked in the crypt, but this time, they seemed more numerous and aggressive. Ilka held the chalice tightly and, remembering Miklós's words, began reciting an ancient prayer he had taught her. The shadows hesitated for a moment, but soon advanced. Desperate, Ilka raised the chalice and directed the light from the cross at the shadows. A burst of light filled the room, and the spirits retreated, disappearing into the darkness. Catalin, shocked, fell to her knees, thanking Ilka for saving her life. With the chalice in her possession, Ilka knew she had only one artifact left to find, the sword of Arpad. But before continuing her quest, she needed to rest and plan her next steps. She knew that the evil forces were growing stronger and time was running out. The baby in her arms was the key to everything, and she could not afford to fail. After her temporary victory over the shadows at the Hungarian National Museum, Ilka knew her next destination would be the most dangerous. She needed to find the sword of Arpad, the final piece of the puzzle that could seal away the evil forces. According to legend, the sword was hidden in a remote location, guarded by a shadow hunter, a mysterious man known only as János. The journey to János's hideout was arduous, taking Ilka through dense forests and steep mountains surrounding Budapest. With the baby secure in a sling, she pressed on with determination, despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The cold, damp air cut against her face, but nothing could deter her quest. As night fell, Ilka finally spotted a small, isolated cabin among the trees. The faint light of a lantern flickered through the window. With her heart pounding, she approached and knocked on the door. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a tall, rugged man with scars on his face and dark, wary eyes. "Who are you and what do you want here?" János asked in a gruff voice. Ilka took a deep breath and told her story, explaining about the baby, the shadows, and her mission to find the sword of Arpad. János listened in silence, his eyes studying every detail of her face. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in. We need to talk." János's cabin was simple but cozy. On one wall hung an impressive collection of ancient weapons and mystical artifacts. János served Ilka tea and began to talk about his own past. He was the last of a lineage of shadow hunters, dedicated to protecting the world from evil forces. "The sword of Arpad is the most powerful weapon against the shadows," János explained. "But it's also the most dangerous. Using it requires great courage and sacrifice." Determined, Ilka asked where she could find the sword. János sighed and pointed to an old map on the table. "The sword is hidden in a cave on Mount Gellert, guarded by an immortal sentinel. Only those with a pure heart can pass him." Without hesitation, Ilka decided to leave immediately. Seeing her determination, János offered to guide her to the cave's entrance. They left the cabin together, with the night falling heavily around them. The path to Mount Gellert was treacherous, with narrow trails and loose rocks. As they climbed, Ilka felt the shadows closing in, lurking at the edges of her vision. But with János by her side, she felt more confident. Finally, they reached the cave's entrance. The opening was dark and intimidating, with a cold draft emanating from its depths. János stopped, looking at Ilka with seriousness. "This is where I stop," he said. "Only you can enter. Remember, the sword will require a great sacrifice." With one last grateful glance, Ilka entered the cave, feeling the weight of the darkness around her. Each step echoed off the walls, and the feeling of being watched intensified. At the end of the cave, a faint light glowed, and she knew she was close to her goal. Upon reaching the main chamber, Ilka found the immortal guardian, a tall and imposing figure clad in shining armor. His eyes glowed with an ancient, wise light. He spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "You seek the sword of Arpad. Prove that you are worthy." Ilka, holding the baby tightly, felt a surge of courage and determination. She explained her mission, her need to protect the baby, and to seal the evil forces. The guardian listened in silence and, after a moment of reflection, nodded. "You possess the necessary courage. But remember, the sword will demand a sacrifice." With these words, the guardian revealed the sword of Arpad, a magnificent blade that shone with its own light. Ilka, with the weight of responsibility heavy on her heart, reached out and grasped the sword, feeling a wave of power coursing through her body. As she emerged from the cave, the night was at its peak, and the shadows around her seemed more restless than ever. János, waiting outside, looked at her with a mix of relief and respect. "Now the real battle begins," he said. Ilka knew he was right. With the sword, the chalice, and the cross in hand, she had the tools needed to confront the evil forces. But the path ahead would be fraught with danger, and the sacrifice required by the sword was still a mystery that weighed on her heart. One thing was certain, Ilka was ready to face any challenge to protect the baby and end the curse threatening Budapest. With the sword of Arpad firmly in hand and the other sacred artifacts in her possession, Ilka knew time was running out. The decisive moment was approaching, and the city of Budapest seemed to pulse with palpable tension, as if sensing the onset of a final confrontation. Ilka's plan was to perform the sealing ceremony at the city's oldest and most sacred site, the ancient subterranean temple beneath Buda Castle. The path to the temple was winding and complex, crossing catacombs and forgotten galleries. With each step, the air grew denser, and the feeling of being watched intensified. Ilka carried the baby with great care, aware that every movement could be crucial to the success of her mission. Finally, she arrived at the temple entrance, an ancient opening adorned with arcane symbols and inscriptions that faintly glowed in the light of the torches she had lit. Inside, the temple was a vast hall with walls covered in ancient frescoes and statues of gods and spirits. In the center stood a stone altar where Ilka would perform the ritual. Before beginning, Ilka paused to review the necessary items: the cross of Saint Stephen, the chalice of Hunyadi, and the sword of Arpad. Each artifact had a specific role in the ceremony and needed to be placed exactly as instructed. With one last glance at the artifacts and a thought of János, who had guided her well, Ilka began preparing the altar. She placed the cross in the center, surrounded by protective symbols she had drawn with a special powder she found in the temple. She set the chalice beside it, filled with holy water, and finally placed the sword of Arpad on the altar in a position of prominence. The atmosphere around her seemed to shift. Shadows on the walls began to move, dancing in an unsettling manner, and the air was charged with a sinister energy. Ilka knew the evil forces were aware that the moment of truth had arrived. She started reciting the ancient incantations and prayers that had been passed down from Miklos and the texts she had found. As the ancient words filled the temple, a sense of rising resistance began to manifest. The shadows around grew denser and more aggressive, forming threatening figures that seemed intent on disrupting the ritual. Ilka remained steadfast, continuing to chant with a firm and determined voice. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the temple, making the torches flicker and creating a chorus of disturbing whispers. The figure of the White Lady appeared at the entrance of the temple, her face still etched with sorrow but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She watched the ceremony with an imposing presence, as if there to protect Ilka and ensure the ritual's success. The shadows began to move frenetically, attacking with renewed fury. Ilka, feeling the mounting pressure, raised the sword of Arpad and made a decisive swing, cutting through the shadows that tried to invade the altar. Each strike seemed to cause an explosion of light and force, repelling the approaching evil forces. As the ritual reached its climax, Ilka poured the water from the chalice over the altar and, with a shout of determination, made a final gesture with the sword. The light from the cross, the chalice, and the sword intensified, enveloping the temple in an explosion of brilliance and energy. The shadows screamed and writhed, and then, finally, began to vanish, being absorbed by the light Ilka had summoned. With the ritual complete, the temple fell silent once more. The shadows had dissipated, and the malevolent presence that had haunted Budapest seemed to have been finally banished. Ilka, exhausted, looked at the baby, who was calm, as if peace had finally settled over him. The White Lady, with a look of gratitude and relief, made one final appearance before disappearing into the shadows. Her face appeared more serene, as if she could finally rest in peace. Ilka sat at the altar, realization and exhaustion mingling in her eyes. The ceremony was over, but the city still bore the scars of its battle. She knew the path ahead would be one of rebuilding and healing, but she was confident that, with courage and determination, Budapest could finally find peace. With the mission accomplished and the baby protected, Ilka stood up and left the temple, ready to face a new chapter in her life, knowing that the weight of the shadows had been finally lifted. With the ceremony complete and a temporary peace restored in Budapest, Ilka thought she could finally relax. The city seemed to have returned to normal, but a persistent feeling that something was still unresolved troubled her. The baby, now safe, was calm, but Ilka felt that the truth about the curse still needed to be revealed. Determined to uncover any remaining mystery, Ilka sought help from Julia, the curator of the Budapest History Museum. They met at the museum, where Julia was examining old documents that might provide more clues about the legend of the White Lady. "You did an incredible job, Ilka," Julia said, "but there are still details about the White Lady that need to be clarified. Some legends suggest that she was not just searching for her child, but for something even more valuable." With Julia's help, Ilka examined ancient manuscripts and historical records. They found a reference to a lost artifact, an ancient book that contained the secrets for true protection against evil forces. This book, called the Book of the Ancients, had been hidden to keep its contents from falling into the wrong hands. Ilka and Julia discovered that the book was kept in a secret location beneath the city of Budapest, in an underground library that had been sealed for centuries. The library was known only to a few scholars and was hidden in a maze of underground tunnels. With this information, Ilka prepared for another journey. She descended into the tunnels, with Julia by her side, following ancient maps and solving complex puzzles. With each step, the air grew colder and the shadows denser. Eventually, they reached the underground library, a majestic chamber filled with ancient books and scrolls. In the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, was the Book of the Ancients. Ilka approached carefully and took it. Upon opening the book, she was greeted by a series of rituals and incantations, including a final ritual that promised to reveal the truth about the White Lady and the baby. As Ilka read the book, she uncovered a startling truth. The White Lady was not just a victim, but also a guardian meant to protect an ancient artifact with the power to seal an eternal evil force. The baby Ilka had found was not just a child but the key to unlocking this artifact. The ritual Ilka had performed was only part of the process. The true revelation came when Ilka realized that the force sealed in the past was about to awaken again. The book contained a final instruction for a permanent protection ritual that needed to be performed at the exact moment of the full moon to ensure that the evil force would not return. Now aware of the magnitude of her mission, Ilka prepared to perform the final ritual. With Julia's help, she set up the ritual according to the book's instructions, and when the full moon rose in the sky, the city seemed to be in a state of calm but also anticipation. At the climax of the ritual, Ilka used all the sacred artifacts and recited the final incantations. An intense light enveloped the city, and the sense of terror that had hung over Budapest began to fade. The baby, now illuminated by this light, seemed to shine with an aura of protection and purity. Upon completing the ritual, Ilka felt a wave of peace and accomplishment. The evil force had been permanently sealed, and the truth about the White Lady and the baby had been revealed. The ancient book was secured again, this time in a safe and inaccessible location, to ensure its power would not be used for evil. Ilka looked at the now tranquil city with a sense of satisfaction. The struggle had been long and hard, but courage and determination had prevailed. Budapest was finally free from the shadows that had haunted it, and the truth had been restored. As the full moon shone over the city, Ilka walked away from the temple, knowing that peace had been achieved and that the story of her journey would be remembered as a saga of courage and hope.